Hi everyone, good evening.
Good evening. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
Fine, thanks.
So, shall we get started or are we waiting for others to
Let's wait.
join?
Yes, let's
Okay,
wait 2 minutes.
sure, fine. I'm fine with that.
علي شوف اسمح.
Please let me know when can I start. I think the session recording has already started. So,
Yes, Muhammad.
Yes, you can start.
Okay.
sure. Thank you, everyone. We are on the day 3 of API management training. In the 2 previous days, we have learned about how to use API Gateway in order for creating APIs. And then we saw how to secure them using basic auth to begin with. And then we saw how to create applications which acts as an interface for consumers when they invoke the API using application, we authenticate the consumers. And along with that, we also saw by creating an application, we can use a wide range of identification types or identifiers, which can come in the request transport layer. So we had a demo on JWT and OAuth 2 tokens. So at the same time, we saw if we want to use API gateway for a token issuer or to act as an auth server, what are the necessary configurations we need to do on the API gateway server level. So for both using JWT and OAuth2 based token, we have to do a little more configuration at the application level by defining their schemes. The schemes are important for both OAuth2 token use case and JWT based authentication use case, because by defining by defining this auth strategy, we can tell API gateway what is the auth server against which the token, the incoming JWT or incoming OAuth2 will be validated, and also in case of a OAuth especially, we can define different grant types for the client to retrieve the token. So we got we witnessed yesterday how we can use different grant types called authorization code, implicit, resource owner, and client credentials, and also like how to generate the refresh tokens. So after that, we had a brief discussion about policies, because today we are going to start with the detailed explanation of policies individually. So when I was talking about policies, when I was giving an overview, I explained you all what is a global policy. So global policies, from the name, as the name suggests, these are like common policies which can be applied to one or more than one APIs. We can also define certain filter criteria based on the type of the API or the version of the API. If we are using REST API, we can identify the resources or methods and can implement these policies. But whenever we are creating a global policy, I mean, there is of course no restriction on which policy we can create as a global policy. Practically everything we can create as a global policy, and we can keep creating APIs. The moment we create a new API, if it matches with the criteria defined in the global policies, the policy will be applied to that API. So we also saw how to create a scope level policy. I think for the Hello World P1, no, not this one. For the REST API, I think we created a scope. Okay. I don't remember exactly. Oh, yeah. So for calculator V1 API, we created a small, to do a POC, we created an anonymous scope for one of the operations. I removed that actually today. So we saw like we can pick a particular operation and can apply that scope. Now, when we have all global policy, API level policy and scope level policies are present, but that too, the same for a same policy action, when we have policies created at these three different levels, at runtime, API gateway runs a logic called policy order precedence to identify which policy will be given the highest priority. So if global scope and API level policies, all three are present, then global policy will be given highest priority. If only scope level policy and API level policies are present, then scope level policy will be given the highest priority. Also within the scope level policy for SOAP APIs, it is simple because we can create policies only for one or more operations of a SOAP API. But if we have a REST API in hand, then we can also identify the HTTP method of the REST resource in that API. And based on that, we can also create a scope level policy. So when scope level policy is created at an HTTP method level for a REST API particularly, what happens is the method level policy is given priority over the resource level policy over the API level policy. So using scope level policy, so the purpose of using global policy is like to standardize the API behavior if there are multiple APIs found to use a similar type of policy actions. So we can standardize all the actions by defining global policies. Whereas scope level policies allow us to further like granularize the access to an API, be it a SOAP API or a REST API. We can further control how the operation of a SOAP API or more than one operations of a SOAP API or the REST resources or the resources HTTP methods can be accessed by the consumers. So that's all about global and scope level policies. So one threat protection will cover that in tomorrow's session. So threat protection is also a kind of global policy, but the implementation is slightly different from this global or scope level policies. One thing I did not cover yesterday, I did not do it, I did do it intentionally. That is when we were discussing about creating application for consumer authentication. We did not cover the approval workflows for application creation. So when we talk about approval workflow, so two types of approval workflows are possible. So if we are having the application created from developer portal, we had seen a quick demo yesterday, like how from developer portal we can trigger application creation on gateway. So we can have approval workflows implemented in developer portal whenever such request is made from developer portal. At the same time, we can have workflows created on the gateway side to control not just the application creation, but let's say if I want to update the API key of an application, so I can configure workflows like that. Let's say for this update application. So I can enable this update application workflow and can select who will be the approver or the group of approvers, and can select like who who from that group of not who, like whether anyone from the group can approve this request or everyone requires to approve this request. So I can have that control, and then I can configure several notifications to send the approval request to the intended group of approvers. Also, I can configure the approval mail that will be sent to the sent back to the requester upon approval of or upon like upon someone from the approval group approves the application update request. Similarly, we can also send rejection emails. So my plan is when we talk about developer portal and we start the application creation from here, I'll get back to this topic and I'll also show how to configure this. The only drawback is that my local does not have an email server configured. So probably I cannot show you the email that will be sent out or that will be received by the approvers, etc. But apart from that, I can show you how the requests are queued up to the approvers bucket from this pending request view, and what an approver needs to do in order to approve such request. So this is like pending, and we will talk about this. I mean, I just give you a quick overview of the workflow, but in detail we'll implement this, and in detail we will talk about it along with developer portal. So API gateway, very quickly on the same topic of approval configuration. So API Gateway provides approval configuration for other activities also. So for example, if I'm creating plans and packages for APIs, so I can create them and enable the workflow related to plans and package creation. So whenever a plan is created, someone has to review whether the plan is correct or not, it is meeting the business requirement or not. And then based on that, the approval can be given, and only then the plan can be published back to the developer portal and can be given to the consumers for subscription. So similarly, like if I want to going further, if I after publishing it to the developer portal, if I want to further update the plan or update the subscription, I can do so and can enable the corresponding workflow for approvers to view what is the change being implemented and approve or reject based on that. So since these are all related to developer portals, so it makes much more sense that we cover all these things during developer portal discussion. So that is one thing I did not cover yesterday. And just a quick information on this JWT and API, sorry, JWT and OAuth token. So normally, like, so there are, okay. When we use the APIs for generating JWT token or OAuth token, we used, let me open this. So we use this protocol, HTTPS, and then the server URL. So normally what happens is API gateway enforces all incoming requests to retrieve a token to use HTTPS protocol. But if required, we can change it to use HTTP protocol. Let me go back to administrator view. So, so there are two So there are two extended parameters available, rather three if you are using OpenID Connect as well. Is JWT, sorry, JWT is HTTP or OpenID is HTTP and OAuth 2 is HTTP. So by default, when the product is installed, the value is set to true, meaning whenever we are using any of the access token or authorization code token or refresh token URL, or for JWT, whenever we are using the URL to with or without the custom claim body, always we have to stick to the HTTPS protocol. But if required, we can change change the value to false, and then we can use the same URL over HTTP protocol. So may not be needed. We fall back on the default settings, but just it's good to know that we have such control to switch between HTTP and HTTPS protocol for using this URLs. So that's all about application and their authentication types and all. So as we said yesterday, that today our main focus will be to understand the policies, different policies. So I have got a mix of SOAP and REST APIs like Hello World and Calculated V1 and Hello World REST APIs. All three are created. And also I'll create another API because some of the routing policies or the other policy actions are easy to configure for REST APIs compared to a SOAP API. But once you get the concept, I think you can explore and see how to exactly configure it. To save some time, I just took whatever is easy and quick to demo. Okay. So we'll begin today's session with the routing policy. So basically, we will cover routing transformation and mediation policy. So routing policies, why they are needed? Of course, they are needed to route the request to native endpoints, but we can adopt different techniques to route the request to the native endpoint. Transformation policies are present. So these policies can help us to reformat the incoming request or response messages if required. And also it can do conditional error processing. So if I want to segregate the error between based on their status code or based on a custom response code, I can, instead of native, of course, native service can do all of these for us, but there can be different consumer requirements. So instead of native service catering to all the consumer requirements to send a certain set of response code and error codes or error description, etc., we can move that functionality to API gateway, and using conditional error processing, we can achieve that. Then protocol bridging, you have already seen that how we can enable an API to be accessible using HTTP and HTTPS protocol. We can enforce HTTPS only. So we'll do a quick recap on that, and also like we can use JMS protocol to invoke an API. We'll see if I'll show if that. I'll try to demo that as well. The definition of APIs with callback and mashup, not covering in this session. If we have time, I'll get back to this on last day. But mostly we will be focusing on this. And once done, we will be talking about the different traffic monitoring policies that we have. Okay. So now, starting with the the routing policy. So what could be the different routing use cases? So if I open any of the APIs, so far, what we are doing is in the policies, and I think on day one, when we created our first API, I mentioned that by default, a routing policy gets assigned to the API upon its creation. So by default, API gateway assigns a straight-through routing policy where we can define the native endpoint and send the request to the native endpoint. Now, apart from this straight-through routing policy, there are several other routing policies available. And whenever we are using any of these routing policies, optionally, we may have to use this outbound auth transport policy or outbound auth message policy. So we'll go through each of these use cases. Now, when to use straight-through routing policy? I'll begin with that because that is the default routing policy that gets assigned, and in most of the cases, we use this straight-through routing policy. So if let's say if the native service is exposing a native endpoint, so the native endpoint is fixed under any condition. So whenever any request is, for all incoming requests, we need to send the request to a single endpoint of a native service. Then we can use this straight-through routing policy. Now, when I say the endpoint exposed by the native service, it can be like the URL of the server host of the native service. So mostly in dev and QA environment, we get like one single node of native service. So we can directly use their server host port information to reach to the endpoint. In production like scenarios where we can have like native service can have HA implemented. So there can be more than one nodes fronted by a load balancer. But in any case, the load balancer URL is fixed. So all requests must be forwarded to the load balancer URL, and load balancer then distributes the load to any of the native service sitting behind it. So, be it a load balancer URL, I mean native service fronted by a load balancer, or even if load balancer is not present, we can use straight through routing policy to always send incoming request to a fixed endpoint. So when we are using straight through routing policy, so as I said, like in this example, I have a native or an integration server running where I have created this Hello World web service, and I'm always forwarding the request to this endpoint. Now, it is okay if we are defining the endpoint like this, like the protocol, host name, and port. It will work. I mean, functionally, it will work. There is no problem. Also, implementation wise, there is no problem. So instead of, so there is another way of defining this endpoint URI. So we call it using alias in endpoint URI. So what is the drawback of defining like a server or using absolute name of the server and port? So just imagine that this is my development environment. I know my development, I mean the native endpoint of the development, native endpoint in development environment is this one, this server name and port. So now I'm like, I have configured it this way and I'm continuing with the development and unit testing. So now I'm ready to move this API or deploy this API to a QA environment. So when I am deploying this API to QA and maybe after that to UAT and to production environment, every time I deploy, I have to edit the API. I mean, log into API gateway, then edit the API, then edit this policy to keep changing the endpoint, the actual server, because maybe the endpoint URL is also changing based on the environment. In QA, we can have a different server name port. In production, it will be different. So if we keep using the absolute host name and port for when defining the endpoint URI, the drawback is after every deployment, we have to change it to repoint it to the correct server name and port of the native application. So instead of doing that, what we can do is we can use endpoint aliases and do a variable substitution at runtime. I mean, we can define the endpoint alias name here, and at runtime, API Gateway does a variable substitution to replace the alias value with the correct or with the defined server name and port, the actual name and port. The advantage of using alias is, so normally when we set up the environment or at the beginning of the development cycle, we create the aliases which are pointing at the actual endpoint with the server name and port. And then we can use that alias in the policy action stage. So when we are ready to go to the next stage, so alias can be on its own, can be recreated on the server, on the target. Let's say in QA API Gateway, I can create the same alias with a different server name and port. And I need not change anything at the API layer. I can simply deploy the API to the QA environment and can use it seamlessly. So this native endpoint, like in my case, and you will also come across this scenario, that there are like almost all the APIs out of 7 or 8 APIs that I have in Gateway, 6 of them are using the same 6 of them are using the same server and port. So imagine the effort you are saving, the complications you are saving by defining an alias. You need not touch any 6 of them. You are creating the alias it is a one-time activity to create the alias and keep using that alias in all your APIs. So for that purpose, I have created a few aliases. So I have created like a local HTTP endpoint alias, which is pointing at the my local servers. The other integration servers HTTP port. Similarly, I have a local HTTPS endpoint created, which is using the 6643 is the HTTPS port of the other integration server. So if we want to create a new alias, we can do so from this alias pages. From this alias page. Now, this page can be accessed by normal, it is not, it can be accessed by anyone. If you are creating restricted access for your team members, you can always from that user management teams option for the corresponding team, you can always select alias management option so that the developers will have the access to create, modify, or delete an alias. If you want to keep it restricted only for admin users, then you can do so. So let's say I want to create another alias. So I can give a name of this alias and then the type. So I showed the ones I have created is for endpoints where I can give the server name and password. Server host and port information. Apart from the endpoint aliases, we can create different other alias. So simple alias is meant for like just create a value and this like it is kind of if you think of global variables in integration server, it is something similar. So you can create any you can give any value, and wherever you need this value to be used, you can use the alias name, and at runtime, your runtime API gateway will substitute the alias name with this value. So simple alias is something like global variable. We can define it and we can use it anywhere we need. Then endpoint alias, as I said, like here we can define the actual server host and port. And if we are using HTTPS or SSL based authentication, then we can define what will be the key store and trust store to use for enabling SSL communication to the HTTPS endpoint URI. At the same time, if let's say if my endpoint is protected by mostly the SOAP API, for example, is protected by WS security headers, then I can tick this box. So what will happen is all the incoming WS security headers in the security headers in the incoming request will be sent to the native endpoint as is. So although that will be written and the native endpoint will receive that, and native endpoint can do their own validation. So based on the requirement, we can select whether or not to use this option. I'm specifically stressing on this parameter because when we configure the straight-through routing policy and when we use the inbound message auth policy, you will see that similar option available to pass on the security headers. So alias like you are creating for a generic purpose. So if you are selecting this property, meaning wherever you are going to use this alias, everywhere this WS security headers, if present, will be passed. So it's better not to select this at the alias level. Rather, you control it at the API level, especially when you are routing the request to the actual endpoint. We'll see how it works. So then we have something called HTTP Transport Security Alias. So it is possible that when we are calling native service, so native service is also protected by some sort of identifiers, like we have maybe the native application has enforced basic authentication, or maybe JWT based authentication, or OAuth2 based authentication. So when we are calling the native service, native endpoint, we also have to send the user ID password, for example, to call the native endpoint. So instead of like we have an option in the API layer itself. Let me open the API window in parallel. So we can always use this outbound authentication transport layer, where we can actually input the username and password. But again, the same problem, the password may change based on the environment. So instead, if we keep the username password embedded in this policy action stage, meaning after deployment, I have to change the password. So instead of using the username password directly in the policy action stage, we can use an alias, and the alias will be read from here. So if we are choosing alias type as HTTP Transport Security Alias, in this we can define what is the username and password, and wherever we need to use this same username and password, because mostly like all your 10 APIs are going to call the same native endpoint. Hence, we need to send the same username and password for all native endpoint calls. So we can define it at one place. So management of the password becomes easy, because tomorrow if the application is giving us a new password, we just have to make the change at one place, and that will be it. So we can either select a basic basic auth, which is custom credit, basic auth and the username password. If there is also an option of passing the incoming auth information to the native endpoint, meaning the native endpoint and API are both using the same user ID password. So if that is the case, then we can also select API basic authentication, incoming HTTP basic authentication. Otherwise, we will select this custom credentials, where we can define the username and password. Other options are like JWT. We can forward the incoming JWT to native service, and they can identify the token. We can similarly forward the OAuth token using the custom credential. Either we can forward the incoming auth token. In that case, the native and our, API gateway is not going to, or API gateway will do the validation, and same set of configuration has to be present on the native server side, so that native is able to identify the OAuth. For OAuth, there is another option called client credentials. So I'm not quite sure what exactly needs to be passed here. My understanding was like we'll pass the same. It says OAuth 2 tokens, so I'm not sure if it is actually asking us to pass the incoming bearer token. So there is a way to extract the incoming bearer token from the request header. Maybe we need to send the token as is to the native to authenticate the token. So there are other options as well, NTLM and Kerberos. So all are working with on the same principle that we can define something here and that will be applicable wherever this alias is used. And also there is no restriction on what number of alias we can create. SOAP message security alias. So if we have the SOAP endpoint protected by WS security headers, then we can define the authentication scheme here. So maybe WS's username, along with that the password and the signing configuration. So you will find all these parameters, all are available when we see this outbound auth transport or outbound auth message. All this will be, all these configurations that we can see under aliases are present there. The only difference is this is kind of global configuration, whereas those are very specific to the APIs, how the API request will be handled. Last but not the least, okay, XSLT. If we are using any XSLT for request response or error message transformation, then we can use XSLT and we can configure the XSLT definition, like select the XSLT file. And instead of hard coding the XSLT file in all the APIs which requires such kind of transformation, we can simply use the alias. And last but not the least, this web service, web methods, IS service alias. So yesterday we saw like when we are defining a custom policy, custom extension or custom policy, so we have an option of what is the custom action, and we can call web methods IS service. So when adding the web methods IS service information, either we can use the absolute namespace of the service and who is going to invoke that service and tick this box, comply to IS spec, or we can use a service alias. So the same information, like what is the service namespace, the user who is going to invoke this service and comply to ISPID can be configured under this web methods IS service alias. So again, the advantage is I need not be worried about if tomorrow, let's say the service namespace is changing or the username is changing, user who can call this service. I need not be worried about modifying all the APIs using this service. Rather, I can make the change at one place and it will be immediately reflected in all other APIs. So that's all about alias creation. So now, instead of using this in the straight-through routing policy, instead of using this actual URL, I'll configure the alias name. Now we are configuring the alias name like this. So I have already pre-configured some of the alias. So I'll use the this HTTP local HTTP endpoint. Now, this alias kind of like at runtime, the alias name will be substituted by its actual value. So whenever we want to do that kind of variable substitution or substitution for alias, we need to specify a particular format or we need to follow a specific syntax for API gateway to identify that this is a variable that will be substituted. So API gateway mostly relies on YAML format. All its internal code logic is built using YAML specification. So this is like a YAML representation of a variable. So always remember to enclose the variable names wherever, you will see it later on as well in case of request or response transformation policies. So always enclose the variable name in closed curly brackets and append it with a $sign, and then the actual service name. So if you wish, you can create another alias to say like web service endpoint. It will be like a simple alias, and you can save yourself from modifying this value or handling this value. So for now, I'll keep it to this. So this is the endpoint. And similarly, in the outbound auth transformation, auth transport, I will use the alias called local service. So why I'm using it? Because my hello world v1, the WSD is protected by Hello World ACL, and Hello World ACL on the server is using a WS consumer group. Let me open the server. So Hello World ACL is mapped to a user group and then to this user, WS consumer user. So I have configured this alias, local service user alias, which is configured with WS configure consumer user and the password of it. So now I'm going to use this alias instead of typing the username and password. So once done, we can save the change, and this will be reflected here. Let me just enable tracing, because we can see like how API Gateway is doing the variable substitution. So let's call this service. We have too many. Yeah. So if I go to tracer view, I will see that in the routing stage, these were the configured variables, the authentication scheme alias named this, and the in the straight through routing, the configured, okay, sorry, straight. So in the authentication transport layer, the configured variable was this at runtime. API Gateway successfully substituted it with the basic auth that is coming from the, that is taken from the authorization. So input before policy execution and after policy execution will show this result. And also for the endpoint was defined like this. This was the configuration at runtime, and API Gateway successfully. It will show input before policy execution and what is the variable value it substituted. So you can view that the actual value got set here. So using this view, we can identify whether the aliases are being properly replaced with their values or not, and if my alias has to be edited or not. So this is all about routing, not just routing. So the use of alias, we'll see further use of aliases. And going forward, for all the other routing use cases, we are going to try to use the aliases as much as possible instead of changing the endpoints. Okay, so up until this point, we covered straight through routing policy. So any doubts, any questions, or any thing you want to, anything else you are curious about? If not, I'll just move on to the next routing rule policies. So I hope there is no question. So like straight through, so I'm just moving on to the next routing policies. We have got lots of ground to cover today, so I'll try to be a little quick. So load balancer routing policy, like straight through routing policy is okay, another thing before I start talking about any other policies. So this routing policy particularly, there are several policy actions available, right? But these policy actions are mutually exclusive. You cannot use straight through routing plus, for example, load balancer routing in the same action. So if you try to add a load balancer routing policy here, API gateway will immediately warn you saying that and the load balancer and straight through routing cannot coexist. So either one has to be present. So we can replace straight through with load balancer. If we want to further replace it, let's say I want to use dynamic routing, I can do so, and load balancer will be replaced with dynamic routing. So load balancer routing. Just a second, this is load balancer. Yeah. So load balancer routing, like straight through routing, is also meant for just a second, and let me just reconfirm it. So load balancer routing is something like API gateway's inherent capability to load balance the request to multiple endpoints. So all, regardless of the incoming request, or it doesn't check any condition, we can configure multiple endpoints. Let's say I'm configuring different aliases. These are non-existent, just to demo. I'm showing that, let's say I'm configuring server 1 as one of the endpoint. Then I can add another endpoint called server 2. Likewise, so what will happen is I can add more endpoint URIs here. So at runtime, API gateway, regardless of the content or the any it will just simply distribute the request to one of these endpoint URIs. So basically, it can mimic the load balancer functionality. Only difference is like industry standard load balancers, for example, F5, etc., can adopt multiple algorithms to distribute the load. For example, round robin or least recently used or sticky policy, etc. But in case of API gateway, when it is doing a load balancing or running a load balancing logic, it can only use the round robin algorithm. So first request will go to the first endpoint, second will go to the second, then again it will go to the first, second, likewise. If one of the endpoint is down, let's say server 2 is down, then it will continue to send the request to server 1. So this is okay to use, but my recommendation would be, if you have a load balancer available in front of your native gateway, native endpoint, try using that instead of using API Gateway's in-house load balancing capabilities, because that load balancer will give you much more other options, whereas this is very basic. What API Gateway provides is very basic. And also, this is not one of the core functionalities of API gateway, like for which we are using it. So then why unnecessary put a burden on API gateway to do all this load balancing activities, whereas someone else can do it instead of API gateway. So
Yeah.
for test
Excuse me.
purpose, yes.
Yes, I believe this is a rule for the load balancer, but sometimes we need to apply some kind of manual routing based on a set of condition.
Yes,
Maybe
so I have not covered that. I'm going to cover that
okay.
next after
And
load
how
balancer.
we can do apply? You told me you say you say that if the one of this endpoint it is down, it will directly subsequent requests will we go to the next endpoint. How the circuit broker applied to this configuration? يعني, how if the requests fail and the next one it's going to the next endpoint and he will stop sending, how he detect, how the gateway detects this endpoint it's down?
I believe that is gateway's internal logic that is not exposed to us, but it can detect whether one endpoint is down or not, and then it will keep forwarding the request to the other. So that logic is not shared with us, but it is inbuilt logic.
Okay. So the other point it is related to this conditional routing. It will would it be covered in another policy?
Yes, yes. So we have this
Okay.
three policies: dynamic, conditional, and content-based routing. So after load balancer, I'll cover that. I'm actually done with load balancer, so I'll move to dynamic and then content and then finally conditional.
Thank you.
Sure. So just one more point. Although I said like I don't recommend using load balancing policy in API gateway, but sometimes in case of performance testings, there can be a request by the customer saying that they want to eliminate load balancer and see how API gateway. So basically, when all these layers are involved in a request and response processing, so they each add some amount of response time to the overall response time. So if someone wants to isolate or do a testing without load balancer to estimate how much time, additional response time load balancer is adding up to the overall response time, then in that case we can eliminate load balancer. We can apply this policy and configure the endpoints, and using that we can do a round of performance testing. Rarely that happens, but I have seen that request being raised to us. So that's another not so common, but possible use case of using load balancer routing. So so this straight through and load balancer routing, in this two cases, API gateway is not checking any condition and it is simply forwarding the request to one or more endpoints. Now, there can be scenarios where we have to check certain condition and decide which endpoint the request should go to. Or if the conditions are not matched, then there has to be some default processing. I mean, it's up to the implementation, but there has to be like a fallback URL or a default URL where by default the request will be sent and when no condition match is found. So for that purpose, we can use one of these three routing policies. So we'll begin with dynamic routing policy. So what happens in dynamic routing policy is that in this policy action, the request comes with the the endpoint URL is found dynamically at runtime. So when the consumer sends the request, they can add some directive either in the message header or in the message body or in the message context actually. And based on that directive, we can dynamically generate the endpoint URL. So when we are configuring dynamic routing endpoint, so we have two things to configure. So one is the route to URL, and here under this the endpoint URI. So this is like a default URL that will be used in case there is no directive sent in the request header or in the request context by the consumer. So for this demo, I'm gonna use this calculator web service, because calculator web service has multiple operations, and easily we can view or see how it is going to work. So what I have done is calculator web service has 4 operations: add, multiply, subtract, and whole square. If the request is not any one of matching with any of one of these operations, or as I said, there can be a default URL when for all this condition based routing, no condition is found, then the request has to be handled by a different way. So for that purpose, I have created this default processing service. So it will return a particular error message in case none of the conditions are matched. And I will use this services URL as the default URL. So let me copy that URL first. So when no condition is matched, the default processing service is going to return this kind of error message. So I'm going to configure that URL here as the default URI to use by the routing logic. Similarly, when we are defining the endpoint, we can always substitute the server name and port with the alias created. So I'm not changing anything here because this is going to be on HTTP, and so keeping all other configuration fields as is. So now for dynamic routing rule, I can define a condition. So condition will say route using either a header element or an element in the context. Now, when we choose header, it's asked or the at runtime, like API gateway expects the header element in the request header, in the transport header, and that header element must contain the path or some kind of information from which we can derive the actual endpoint. So what I'm going to do is I will make this, let me close this one and open. So this is my calculator add operation. So what I'm going to do is in the header, I'm going to send an element called something like this, X routing URI. And the value of them, and this is just a hypothetical implementation, there can be more practical requirement for using this. And in this route to operation, in this header parameter, I'm going to say this is the path of the web service. I'm not adding the server details here. Okay. So this is what I'm going to send. So at the API policy stage, what I have to do is I have to choose header as the where the API gateway will look for this information and set the same value here. What is the value? Routing URI. So at runtime, API gateway will extract the routing URI header element, and then there is something called this endpoint URI. So when this condition is matched, when this header element is found, API gateway will dynamically generate the routing endpoint. So by default, it will appear as sys dynamic endpoint or sys DYN endpoint. So we need not change anything in this change anything for this parameter or this name, because API gateway will straight away substitute this with the value of this one. So sys dynamic endpoint will be substituted by X routing URI, and then dollar and within curly bracket, it will be substituted with the correct actual URI value that is coming from in the header. On top of it, we can always apply the alias name. So let's say local HTTP endpoint and then sysdynamic. So this is the amount of configuration that you have to do. We can optionally select the HTTP timeout, HTTP connection timeout or read timeout parameters. But if we are not selecting any one of them, so it will either fall back to the parameters defined in the alias name itself, the server connection endpoint alias, or if nothing is specified, then it will fall back to integration server's default configuration. Similarly, for key store alias, etc., if nothing is specified, it will fall back to the alias or mostly to the alias configuration, or we can specify it here. So this is the configuration that I have to do. I can save it, and now dynamic URL is showing that this will be the one. So let's test this URI, test this one first. So let me change some value here. So now I'm getting a good response. So it is able to route the request to the proper endpoint. So if in case I'm removing this parameter, so API gateway will not be able to find this header element. And one second, should store something. Yeah, ideally it should throw that error back, but I'm not sure why it is not. Strange. I did not expect this. Let me just double check on this once. So endpoint URI route to is this and rule is this. Not sure why it is not working at this stage, but ideally the behavior should be that whenever this routing URI is not sent, API gateway will use the default tracer is not working. Tracer tracing. Give me a minute. I'm just worried that my integration API gateway is throwing any other error because it has been running for. Can you allow me 5 to 10 minutes time? Maybe we can take a quick break. Probably I need to start my API gateway server one more time to, looks like there is some performance issue and it is not working as expected. So can we take a quick pause here for 10 minutes and I'll repair the API gateway if that is okay with you. Otherwise, the further demo cannot be given if this error keeps coming. Is it okay or
Okay, okay, no worries.
very sorry about this, but just let me fix this error. Feel free to drop off or take a quick break while I fix this error first. It is now working. Okay. Sorry for the interruption. Are we good to continue or sorry, I didn't notice if you. Shall I continue or has someone gone on a break and shall wait for them?
Maybe we can wait a couple of minutes.
Sure, sure. Let me try a couple more things as well. Please do let me know when I can begin. I cannot see who has come back or joined back, so please feel free to let me know.
So we are ready. You can we can continue with training.
Sure, sure.
Okay.
Sorry for.
Actually, we have also questions related to the dynamic routing and conditional routing.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
Shall I complete this demo and then can you ask, or
Okay,
you
no
want?
problem. Yes, no problem.
Okay.
No problem.
So just before this interruption, I was showing that in dynamic routing, we can API, we can send a header in the request, and we can give the value of the URI or something by which API gateway identifies where to route the request and can dynamically form the URL. So I am sending this header, which has the path of this web service. And in the condition of this dynamic routing rule, I have defined what is the header element name that API gateway will look for, and sys dynamic endpoint. This will be replaced by the the header element name and the value content in it. So also for dynamic routing rule, we have to configure a default URL. In case this rule evaluates to false, then the request will be forwarded to the default URL. So I have now some I'm sending this header element with the in the request header. So if I hit the API, it is returning a good result. In case I remove this header element, it calls the default processing URL and it sends the some it gives back an error message saying the check the request again, one or more hype input is missing or invalid endpoint. So this default URI, just to clarify, like how we can switch between the actual and default. This is just my idea of implementing this. Maybe in your case, probably a practical example is that for all conditions, for all incoming requests, you will keep forwarding the request to a particular endpoint. But maybe for a very special case, the request will be forwarded to a different endpoint. So something like this. So this is the use case I could think of, and hence I have implemented it this way. But just try to grasp the idea that always we have to specify a header element if in dynamic routing rule condition, and then based on that header element, the URL will be dynamically generated. Now, apart from sending the directive in the header element, we can also select a context-based dynamic routing. So in context-based, it is not very straightforward, because what happens is when we say context, we have to use a custom extension policy along with this. So in this custom extension policy, we can call a flow service or a combination of flow and Java service running on the IS of API gateway. This service will actually identify from the incoming message. So when we say context, it will look for the message elements, the payload elements, and based on that, it can do a lookup. Maybe it can have any logic written into it. So based on those incoming payload attributes or something like that, it can derive what will be the actual URL, and then it will output that URL value in certain parameter, and at runtime, this endpoint, like here. At runtime, API gateway will substitute that variable in this value. I mean, value of that variable in this value, and will perform the, or we can also hard code the variable name here. That will be extracted from the context. But just remember, context-based dynamic routing uses payload attributes. And in order to do some kind of lookup using payload attributes to determine the endpoint URI, we have to take help of, we have to take help of a Flow service or a Java service or a combination of both, which will be running on the integration server of API Gateway. And this service will be actually responsible for returning the URI. So in that case, you may not need to use this way. You can have like one single variable which you can give here, and that variable will have the endpoint, the entire URL of the native service configured. So this way we can do both header element based dynamic routing as well as context based dynamic routing. So now, so this is all about dynamic routing. Now, similar to this dynamic routing, so this dynamic routing, so in Gist, it is just forming the endpoint URL dynamically at runtime. Now, there can be another scenario or use case where we have to do a lookup in the payload value, or in do a lookup of the header element, and based on that we have to generate the or decide where the request will be routed. So for that content, for implementing that use case, we can use this content based routing. So it works. I mean, it takes similar kind of parameters like dynamic routing. So we have to provide a default. Let me cancel this. I'll just copy this URL. So in content-based routing also, we have to define a default URL so that when no condition is matched, this URL will be called and some kind of response will be returned. So we cannot just leave it to leave a blank response. So now in the content-based routing, as I said, it works on the payload. So it can identify the payload elements, and based on that, it can run the rule to find whether the incoming request and the defined payload identifier is matching. If yes, then it will go for go ahead to forward the request to the particular URL. So what I have done is I have I'll keep this add operation as is, and I will configure this rule only for add operation, so that when this subtract or multiply request comes, it will be routed to the default URL. So so as I said, like it will work on the payload identified. Let me just quickly use extract the XPaths. I find it easy this way. So in case of content-based routing, so we will work with the payload identifier. Now there are several ways of identifying a payload. So we'll configure this rule under this rule section. We'll give a name to this rule, saying and we can then identify or add an payload identifier. So if the incoming request is SOAP or is having XML, then we can use XPath. For JSON request, we can use JSON path. And if the incoming request is plain text, then we can use some regular expression to identify the payload element. And based on that, we can run the routing logic. Now, just note here that when we are defining a payload payload element like this, or extracting the identifying the payload element by their XPath or JSON path, we are just checking whether the element is present or not. We are not evaluating the element's value, meaning we are not going to see whether the function add function is equal to has some values or not. It will just assert that this function is present, and that's the extent of the rule. And once this element is found in the incoming request payload, the rule will be evaluated successfully, and then it can be the condition will trigger routing to the defined URL. So apart from defining, so when using content-based routing, we have to define the XPath or JSON path to identify certain payload elements. We can actually add more payload elements likewise. So we can add another payload element. Not just one, but we can identify like another payload element also we can add. So we can define several of them, and the rule will identify each of the payload element. If one is missing, then it will throw an exception, or not throw an exception. It will evaluate the rule as false, or rule will be incorrectly evaluated, and request will be forwarded to the default URL. So along with the payload XPath of the payload element, we can also define namespace prefix, like all the namespace prefix can be evaluated. We can mention the prefix name and the URI. Now, one thing to note here, that if we want to use namespace prefix and URI, the request content type has to be, I mean, I was trying to add this, but then I realized that it will work only when the request type is or content type is application XML. From SOAP UI, I am sending the request always as text XML. I tried to convert it to application XML, but somehow it did not work. So this namespace related condition can only be validated if the request content type is application XML. For text XML, or it cannot be evaluated. So we will keep it at this level, and then the endpoint URI. So endpoint URI, sorry, will be like the other ones. So I'll use this path, and got added. Let's copy this. This UI is a bit tricky because there are similar add and all these options. So be careful when you are working with this URI, because even I make this mistake often, that this is my condition and this is add. Now I have gotten the rule, and let's save it. So yeah, so this is how it will work. So let's hit this API again with some different number. So I'm getting a good response, but if I try to access the same, some other operation, I will now get a different or an error response because I have not specified this. If I specify the payload element as um, cal multiply up to this point, then multiply operation will also work. But because I have not done so, so multiply is now failing. So as I said, like we can keep adding more payload identifiers here. So I can add another rule to now include payload identifier for multiplier as multiply operation as well, and continue to use multiply operation. So this way we can do content-based routing. Just a quick recap that whenever we are using content-based routing, using XPath or JSON path or regular expression, we can identify only whether a particular element is present in the request payload or not. We cannot check what value it is containing, and the routing logic will work only on the Boolean result, whether or not the particular payload element is present or not. So if we want to evaluate value of a particular element in the request payload, for that we can use conditional routing. So if you are working with 10.11 or higher version, you will see our product document recommends that we should always use conditional routing. Actually, conditional routing, content-based routing, and dynamic routing all are present starting from 10.5. But for lower version, they are recommending that in future, mostly dynamic routing and content-based routing probably will be decommissioned, and they will keep only conditional routing, because conditional routing can be used to do both the roles or the functionality of content-based and dynamic routing policy actions. So in conditional routing rule, same way it works, that we have to define this endpoint URI, and then we can create rule to say whether a particular to match a particular condition, and let's say route by operation. So I want to define a condition where I will check what is the incoming SOAP operation name, and based on that, I will forward the request to a particular endpoint. So when we use conditional routing rule, we normally can, or API gateway allows us to use plenty of variables which are defined in its in Elasticsearch. So basically, these variables are called system variables or context variables. Now, system variables are those variables which are stored in API gateway. So, for example, if I'm creating an API, the API name, the version, the application that is consuming this API, all this metadata information will be stored in the Elasticsearch of API gateway. So this name, API name or application name, they become in future, they become like system variable. So using this parameter, using this syntax, for example, API name, I can access the information and say like if API name equals to this, for example, API name equal to this, then this condition will be used. So you will find the use of some variables in later stages also when you define request processing route. response processing or conditional error handling. So this is called variable framework. API gateway allows to use all this metadata information by some variable name. So if you are interested, you can go through the product document to understand more about the variable framework and see what are the different variable framework that are available. So normally variables are derived and stored in Elasticsearch, either from they are extracted either from a request or from a response. And when we extract them from a request or from response, we can extract those variables from payload, from the header. If the variables are passed in form of query parameter or path parameter from there. We can also from response, we can extract the HTTP status code and status message. If we have to extract them from payload, we can also use JSON path XPath. So how they are accessed, how these parameters are accessed are this way. So the standard convention is we have to use param stage, param type, and then the actual query type. Param type and then sometimes query type. So for example, if I want to access a header information, let's say I want to access the host name from the header. So my variable name will become request dot headers dot host name. And then I can use this parameter anywhere and can access the value that is stored against this parameter for this in this particular API context or in the context of this particular API invocation. So there is a huge list present, and trust me, this is very useful because using this variable framework, we can we can avoid a lot of custom development. We can just use any of these parameters to extract some information and can use at later stage of the API policy, or can inject them in the message payload or request or response payload. For example, we can also extract the claims from an incoming JWT token using this particular variable. So there is no restriction where we can use this variable, just that we have to have some idea whether this variable is extracted from a request. For obviously, for example, JWT comes as part of the request. Hence, we have to always use request authorization claim name for extracting a custom claimed content in JWT token. Similarly, if we want to see what is the status code being returned, we can extract that from response. So it will become response.status code. So what I will do here is that I will say whether what is the operation type. So for some of the system variables, we need not even type request or response. They are universally present. So for operation type is one of them. So we call it like system context. Everything is system context variable, but these are like these variables are available all the time whenever an API is created and activated. So I will say that operation type is now equals ignore case add. And I will add this condition. So if this condition is met, only then or let me change it to multiply. This time, let's use a different operation. Yeah, only then the request will be forwarded. Otherwise, all other requests will be forwarded to the default URL, and most likely they will fail. So we'll use local endpoint and the endpoint URI. Okay. So now the expected behavior is if I hit or call this add operation, it will go to the default processing default URI. If I call the multiply operation, it will return a good result to me. So, so this is just a very simple example. We can add any number of rules here to evaluate some parameters. Either these are system parameters. We can also do this way, like let's say some request parameter is coming, attribute is coming in the request payload, and using those some of these attributes, we are doing some lookup and generating some flag. Let's say some simple yes no flag. So what we can do, I'm just giving you an idea. So we can add, if that is the requirement, we can always add a custom extension policy, which will perform this lookup based on the incoming attributes of from in the request, and will set some flag in form of either in form of a custom variable, or it can be present in the output of your the flow service that we are executing from this custom extension policy. Now, using that variable in this stage, we can, instead of using one of the system parameters, system context variable, we can use that custom variable and can evaluate the value of the variable to determine what will be my routing endpoint. The only thing is, if you are doing, like if you are deciding to extract some variable and use it at the next policy action, make sure you understand the sequence in which these actions will be executed and adjust it accordingly. Because unfortunately, we do not have an option of moving these actions, like, change their position. So I cannot move custom extension before conditional routing. Only option available for me is to delete the conditional routing action. And then after this, after custom extension. So basically I have to do this way. Again, have to configure the conditional routing. So in whichever order they are appearing, make sure you decide the order beforehand. Otherwise, the only option is delete them and recreate them in the correct order. So this is how we can use conditional routing. So I understand there are questions on this topic. So yeah, please let me know. Let me know what is the question.
The previous question is related to the dynamic based on a business, maybe inside the database, and you already answered that, like we can use a custom flow that retrieve this logic based on the set of parameters or whatever. But my question here, in standard way, are we able to develop any customization should be developed inside the flow of the API gateway regarding the integration server? So we are able to we have in the environment two integration server now. The basic the integration server, which it is built off inside the gateway, and the other ESP layer.
Yeah, I got your question.
Which it has access to the databases and everything.
Yes, I was coming to that. So I understood your point that whether this the flow service that we are developing on the integration server of API gateway, are they like normal flow services which can interact with, let's say, a database or can interact with a file, read something from a file. So thing is, technically it is possible. So we can install JDBC adapter even on this API gateway integration server and configure connection to backend databases. But it is recommended not to do that. The reason is API gateway IS is meant to contain only the WM API gateway package and nothing else. So if you have this kind of heavy processing to be done where you are looking up some data from the database or a file system, etc., then better you move the logic to your native endpoint. Unfortunately, you may not be able to completely implement the routing logic if those lookups are related for necessary for determining the routing endpoint. But this kind of heavy processing, I would suggest, or even our experts suggest, that should be kept on the integration layer and should not be bring to the API gateway layer. Technically, it is possible, but we should not do that. That is the recommendation. So this service that we are using to supplement. See, what I keep telling is that almost all our policy all our requirements, policy related requirements can be met with out of the box policy configurations. There are few which can be handled by custom logic. For example, JSON encryption, decryption, there is no out of the box support. So, or for XSLT transformation, we can implement those. But if the processing involves a heavy communication between different applications, then those are actually not policy. Those are your processing logic, and hence should not be bring to this API layer, should be kept in the service layer. So, yeah.
Yes, it's clear.
Okay. So that's all about our the routing policies. Now, so far we have used this routing policies to send the request to an endpoint, and we are always using this HTTP, the transport layer authentication, where we are sending some identification credential. Now, there can be requirements where my native service is protected by WS security header. So what we do in that case, so the routing logic, the whole policy configuration changes in case we have some native endpoint protected by a WS security header. So I have that demo ready with me. So before that, so I'll switch to a different API now because unfortunate. Oh, okay. That logic is in my Hello World API. So we'll switch to a different version, create a different version of Hello World API, and we'll test that scenario. So in my native server, I have this Hello World Web Service v2 version. And this is like specifically for SOAP APIs because REST APIs do not have any out-of-the-box policy support for encryption, decryption, or accepting additional user tokens, etc. So what I have done is it's the same Hello World API. Functionally, it is the same, but I have attached a policy called username over transport. So I have attached this WS security policy, which will expect a username token to come as part of in the request, as well as some timestamp token. So let me first create this API here. It was And then we can quickly test it. So I'll take the WSDL URL. This is my Hello World V2 API. So in the policy, it does the same thing. It routes the request to this endpoint. The endpoint is still the same. So let me first add an identify. So I think on day one, we saw the opposite of this, like if my incoming or inbound is protected by WS, then how we can configure that. So now we are seeing like if my outbound is protected, then how we can configure the policy. So yeah. So this is my API endpoint now. I think I have already created the V2 version. So this API will be called by, let's say, my application. If I hit this API as is, so it will initially we will get an error saying that native has returned an error. API gateway outbound client encountered expected transport is HTTPS. But we have used HTTP. So the first thing is that because my native is now protected by WS security, so I have to always use an HTTP endpoint for the native. So for that, what we can do is instead of we can take help of the local I have converted the endpoint to HTTPS. So let's try hitting the URL again. And again, I'm getting an error saying that outbound client is expecting a SOAP header, which is missing in the request. Okay. So now, if you notice here in my API, incoming API request, even if I do not add, I mean, this is a requirement by my native. So I have exposed the native WSDL as is. So for my API gateway, present because since I'm not using this this inbound auth message in the identify access stage, we have not enforced checking the WS tokens in this stage. So API gateway literally doesn't care whether there are such tokens present or not. And this is basically a requirement by the endpoint. So we need to meet this in some other way. And this can be a scenario where your consumer doesn't want to add all these additional tokens. However, your native has enforced such tokens, then and hence they must be sent to the native endpoint. Now, there are two different ways of implementing it. One is that we have convinced the consumer to add the username token. Okay. So we have convinced the consumer of this API to send the username token in the request itself. So they can send the token like this or add the token like this. And this can be sent as is to the native for validation of the incoming token. So if my consumer is sending all this additional token in the request, so basically the security header is coming and in the embedded in the SOAP header, what we can do is we can in the straight through routing logic, or if we have configured any other condition based or content-based routing logic or dynamic routing logic, we can select this option, pass WS security headers. So what will happen in this case is whatever the security header being sent by the consumer in the request, they will be passed as is to my native service. So if we do this, if we just set this to true, now if I can send the what is PW? Oh, WS consumer user. Sorry, my mistake. So the same thing will be forwarded. The token will be exactly forwarded to my native endpoint, and native endpoint can validate, can evaluate the policy based on the incoming tokens and can return a good response. So this is one way of doing it. Now imagine that consumer application has said that they cannot generate this kind of token, but since endpoint needs the tokens, so now it is API Gateway's responsibility to add this token before routing the request to the endpoint. So in that case, what we can do is, along with this straight through routing policy action, we can add this outbound auth message action. And here we can define what is my outbound scheme. So we can say like WS's username the token has to be added to the outbound request. And we can say like what will be the username password to be sent. I mean, which will be added as a token in the request. So I can hard code the username password, and also can select the keystore trustor, which will be used for signing the request. It may not be required, but there is no harm if we do this way. So we have done this. So now we can remove this entire security header from the request, and let's try to send this to the end system. So now also the end system is returning a good response because it has API gateway has attached all the required token in the request that is going to the native. So I tried to capture that. I mean, from the result, we can see that the tokens are getting well validated by the endpoint. That is why we are getting a good response. So I was trying to view whether there is a way to see what exactly is being sent from API gateway to the native. So I tried to get the information from the tracer view, but unfortunately it doesn't show the tokens that are getting added. Maybe for security reason, it doesn't show the tokens that are added. But of course it is working. That is why we are getting a response. Otherwise it would have thrown back an error. I do not know if any way we can actually capture what is the outgoing request to the native. Maybe on the native side, we can include transport header or something to extract. No, transport header will not work. Something to capture the actual incoming request to see what being sent. But the gist is that if we have to implement it between API gateway and native, this is the way we can do it. So we can add this outbound message auth policy action along with straight through routing or any other routing condition. And there we can specify the authentication scheme. So I have just used this WSS username token. So if you want to use a SAML token or any other sign and encryption logic, you can also do that. Now, here in this implementation, I have given or hard-coded the username password as is. If we want to abstract this information, we can take help of an alias. So for that, I have created this alias beforehand. So this alias, like when I was describing alias, I mentioned that we can also create a SOAP message security alias type. So I have done that here. So in this SOAP message security alias, I have defined that I will use this username token to be embedded in the request, and for signing, I will use this set of certificates. So now what I can do is in my API, Hello World V2, so in this outbound auth message, instead of using the WS username token as is, I can refer to Hello World WS's alias. Let me remove this. It's not required any longer because we are separately adding the token. So yeah, so if I add the alias, so at runtime, the behavior will be same that my API gateway embeds all this token that is going to native. Native is validating the tokens and returning a good response. So this is how we can enforce outbound message-based authentication in case native is provided. Native is protected by some sort of WS security policies. Okay. Any questions on this? Because yeah, I do not have much to show. This is how we can do that. And just a quick recap, we have done similar thing in the identify access stage also. I'm not sure if you followed that. So in this case, here also we can, let's say if API itself, so on day one, I said like it can be both ways. So native has already enforced WS security token. So I can take that WSDL as is and can expose it to the consumer. And when consumer sends the request, instead of native doing the validation, API gateway can validate the token on behalf of the native. by using this policy. So same thing we can configure here, like what is the requirement, what API gateway will look for is like, for example, WS token or timestamp parameter. So if these tokens are coming in the incoming request, API gateway will validate the request saying it is okay, and then it can be forwarded to the native. Additionally, we can again send the incoming tokens or this security header to the native for them to do a second layer of validation. Now, there are scenarios possible where we can implement, where native service wants this kind of validation to be done. Maybe your security architect has mandated that this kind of validation has to be done, but for some reason, native is not able to implement this. In that case, we can just take the WSDL and enforce this policy only at the API gateway layer. So WSDL will be changed slightly. So the same that implementation, that what I am talking about, we had done this in this V1 version 2 policy. So if you notice here, in this case, I have just I have used the V1 of the web service, which does not have any policy enforcement. However, I have attached similar policy only at the API layer. So the advantage of doing this is your native need not be bothered about implementing such policy or validating that policy at runtime. Rather, API gateway can meet the security requirement and can also implement this. So depending on the requirement, you can decide where this policy will be enforced. We can do it at both places. Who is going to be responsible for validating this incoming tokens? And accordingly, we can decide what to send to the native or what to expect from the consumer. So that's all about message level policy authentication and for both incoming and outgoing. And needless to mention that this is applicable only for SOAP UIs or SOAP APIs. No, sorry, applicable only to SOAP APIs. REST APIs do not use any such policy. So with that, I have come to an end of routing policy. So there is one more left, which is for routing a SOAP. So for example, if my endpoint is exposed as a JMS message or AMQP using AMQP protocol, then we can send the SOAP over SOAP or REST message over JMS protocol. So I tried implementing or prepare a demo for the SOAP API, could not do it successfully, but I managed to do it for the REST API. The concept is more or less same, just that implementation is slightly different. So let me quickly demo it. I may not be able to run it for you, but at least I can explain you what you need to configure to send a SOAP or an REST request over JMS to endpoint. So this is like the same Hello World API, but it's a REST version of it. So let me remove these two, and I have a predefined template created because these things take time. So let's try. So what happens in case of SOAP over JMS or REST over JMS or AMQP protocol is that native is capable of accepting the request only over JMS. I do not know if you are using JMS or message broker in your project, but I'm assuming that at some point you will use that. However, SOAP over JMS or REST over JMS may not be a common use case for you to implement. So in this case, what happens is I have exposed a SOAP API or a REST API. Consumer is able to call the API using HTTP SOAP or HTTP REST. But my backend can only accept the request over JMS or AMQP protocol. So in this case, we can configure API gateway to take the incoming request and publish it to JMS topic or queue. And since this is like a request reply, so the backend after subscribing the message from that topic will process the request and create a response and will publish the response to another topic from which API gateway can subscribe the response and finally return it back to the consumer. So API gateway can work with JMS seamlessly. So if we ever want to use this protocol for routing, the prerequisite is that we have to configure JMS and JNDI connection alias. Now, when we are doing this kind of SOAP over JMS or REST over JMS routing, one thing we need to keep in mind that both API gateway and my native, whichever is enabled on JMS, has to connect to the same JMS or JNDI provider. I mean, it is common sense that the destinations have to be on the single server or a message broker server. Otherwise, API gateway will keep publishing it to one message server and native will keep hearing on a different message server. So both of them has to be connected to a common or any other equivalent message broker. So for that, I have like a local running in my on my laptop. So I have just configured default IS JNDI provider and default IS JMS connection to use that And the behavior is same. Normally, what you do, like you create connection factory to connect to this Anyway, I mean, API gateway is nothing but an integration server. So the same thing that you do on integration server to connect to a using JNDI or native protocol will follow the same thing. Just that we will do the configuration from this UI. So what I'm trying to do here is in my Hello World API, when using this JMS, REST over JMS routing. So I will publish the message, the incoming request to message out T, which is a topic from where native will subscribe and it will process and return the response to acknowledgement T topic. And at the same time, I have to define some time to live and time to wait parameter and what should be the delivery mode. So delivery mode can be persistent and non-persistent. So persistent means under no condition, under all condition, the message will be stored. Non-persistent means if there is a loss in connection, the message will be lost forever. So this is the API configuration we need to do on the API gateway side at the policy stage. So on my native server, I have this trigger created, subscribe message, which is listening on this topic, and it is calling this process request service, which is processing the request and again publishing the response back to this acknowledgement topic. So let me see if we can test this anyhow. So it's Hello World REST. So yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to invoke this Hello World REST service. using this, and let's see what happens. So it says 40. Yeah, and one thing I noticed, sometimes it works and sometimes it throws an exception. I could not figure out why, but yeah, maybe the publish subscribe rate has got something to do with this, but every alternate request is successful. So now it works fine. And if I again hit it, it will throw an exception. For some reason, every alternate request is processing fine. So, so this hello world, I can invoke using REST protocol, and my backend is going to accept it over GMS. So I have I have saved this this trigger service. I have saved the pipeline for this trigger service. So you can see when API Gateway publishes something to JMS, the JMS message look like this. Now, interesting to note here is whatever header element we are adding in the request, like some of these header element are auto added, like accept encoding or content length or accept or content type element. When API Gateway converts this whole of this incoming REST or SOAP request to a JMS message, it adds all this incoming header parameters to the message, to the properties of the JMS message. So if you further need to use any of these properties, you can extract it from the JMS properties and can use it in your logic. Along with that, it adds the, since I have configured, like I am calling this this REST service using post method, and I'm passing a JMS, sorry, a JSON body. So that is appearing here under the JMS body string parameter. In case I change it to, just for an example, I hope it works with get. Fine. So you will notice that if we are sending, when we are using or calling using get method, for SOAP it will not matter because inherently SOAP uses HTTP post method. But for if we are sending a REST request using get method, all the query parameters, they do also get added to the properties section. So you have to be careful in terms of implementing the native service based on either like what is the operation type, sorry, HTTP method. Based on that, you can decide whether to extract the request parameters from the JMS properties, or if it is coming as a post method, then it is coming as a JSON body, and hence it will be part of the string. So along with this JMS routing policy, one thing we can use is JMS REST properties. So if we want to add a custom property name, let's say request from. And let's say my application too. So we can add custom properties as well. So let's call this API again, and I will see that the custom property got added to the JMS message properties, and the same can be used in the trigger. So request from is here. So I can use this custom property in the trigger in the JMS selector to do some filtering of the messages. So if I select JMS, request from equal to my application, only request with this particular value will come. So based on any of the filters, like not just this custom filter, but whatever is present, we can use them for filtering the JMS message. Now for SOAP over JMS, it is slightly more complicated. The configuration for REST over JMS is pretty straightforward. For SOAP over JMS, if we want to implement this, it is slightly more complicated because API gateway doesn't allow directly to configure the request response topics. Rather, let me show you what it allows. So it asks to add one connection URL and reply to destination. So this connection URL will can be like if we want to use SOAP over JMS. We have to enable JMS provider alias on the provider side. On the API gateway side also, we need to do some configuration. And we can read the values from those JMS provider alias, etc., web service provider alias, etc., to form this connection URL. So if you are interested to know how it is done, you can always refer to the product document for this routing using SOAP over JMS. So this connection URL is formed using these parameters. So protocol by default, it is JMS, then lookup variant. So either it can be WS endpoint alias. Lookup variant is the dynamic topic name or dynamic queue or queue. Basically the destination type, then the actual destination name, and then the parameters. So parameters can be anything. Either it can be the JNDI connection factory URL, etc., or it can be a WS web service endpoint. So if you have configured JMS consumer endpoint on API gateway, so you can use that information. So API gateway at runtime will look up the alias and get the information. Similarly, you can configure a JMS provider alias on your native side so that it can be invoked using that. So there are some samples. So as you can see, SOAP over JMS is slightly tricky to implement. So that is why I thought of explaining the concept using REST, which is much more simpler. The concept is still the same, just that when we are using SOAP over JMS, the destination types, etc., they get automatically created. We don't have to manually create it. I don't know if we can change it to something else. So yeah, so basically this is the idea, that we have to have some topic, destination topic and some reply topic ready, so that API gateway can publish the message to and can get the message response back from the other topic. So this is how we can send a request to an JMS enabled endpoint. And at policy stage, I mean, I showed you that custom extension is available. So if you feel that you want to, none of the out of the box policy is meeting your requirement to send a request to a particular endpoint, you can always take help of custom extension to determine what should be the endpoint. So in that case, API gateway will just execute the service defined in the custom endpoint, and the service will be responsible for sending the request to the endpoint. So it may happen that instead of using this JMS over REST or SOAP out of the box policy, you want to implement your own logic written inside a flow service. So you can use that flow service here in this stage, routing stage. Which will take the incoming request, will reformat it, then finally it will use JMS pub sub JMS call JMS send service to publish the message to the native endpoint. I mean, the JMS endpoint of the native. But this is the idea. I mean, and custom extension, not just for JMS, but can be used for any other can be used as a substitution of any other routing logic. But my suggestion would be most of your routing requirements can be met with the out-of-the-box policies. So try to use them as much as possible, so to save some development effort. So that's all I had to talk about the routing policies. So please let me know
Okay.
if you have any questions.
About this PubSub
Hmm.
through API or through SOAP.
Hmm.
You said that there is a consumer configuration and provider configuration. Actually, I didn't get the difference between both of them. Why we had to do both configuration for consumer and for
No,
provider?
I meant the consumer endpoint has to be configured on API gateway. Similarly, we can configure provider on the native side.
What is a native side? You mean the broker itself? What
Not
is
the
the native side?
brokers. So native means like this is my where my Hello World service is actually running.
Okay, Hello World, it is inside the integration server, and the API connected to this work of flow service in the integration server. So the integration server and the
Yeah. So
no, I didn't get it.
No problem. Let me quickly
Yeah.
explain. So what I mean is that my Hello World is running on a different integration server, and I
Okay.
have API gateway server as well. So they are accessed via different ports. So if I want to send SOAP over JMS, so one thing I have to do is I have to from here. Let me go to administration. So from the API gateways administration, I can create web service endpoint alias, and I can create a consumer alias of JMS transport. So I can define all these properties here. So either JNDI property and either using the JNDI or maybe using the JMS connection URL. So let me set it. And then if there are additional user tokens, etc. are required, I can add them. But at minimum, I have to alias name is required. So let's call it so I have to configure it here. So what will happen is at the policy stage, API gateway, if I'm using if I'm using this policy, I have to define a connection URL. So connection URL will be something like JMS colon then dynamic queue. I think this is the way it is written. QUV / let's say my queue name is Q1. then colon, I can send the consumer alias name. So the consumer alias that I have just created here. The web service consumer alias that I have created here. Like this. So if I do not provide the consumer alias name, I have to provide the JMS connection alias name or JNDI connection alias name, because this connection URL will be formed using these 4 parameters. So protocol, lookup variant, destination, and then parameters. So inside parameters, either I can use a JMS consumer endpoint alias name, which encapsulates the JMS endpoint details, the connection name, the JNDI URL, or I can use JNDI details, or I can use not or and then the target service, like for which API I have to use. So there are some sample givens. So either we use this alias name like this. It has to be in this format. So this format, and then the API service name. So this is what I'm saying, like we have to create a consumer web service alias for JMS for SOAP over JMS on the API gateway. Now I can identify this like my other integration server where my Hello World is running on the server. Similarly, I can create a provider alias. It is on the settings. Here, I can create a provider alias endpoint. And I can define this is the provider, JMS, then WS trigger endpoint delivery mode. So basically here I am defining the queue name, etc. So it will automatically create a trigger and a queue. Just that this queue has to match with the queue name that I am providing in this policy action stage in the WS consumer alias. So I have to create a consumer alias on API gateway. I have to create a provider alias on the integration server. And then I can configure this policy action using this particular connection URL. And then it will work. I tried to do so, but I wasn't successful. And then I did not have much time to debug. We'll see if I can sort it out. So did I answer your question, or you still are in doubt?
Yeah, I'm still confused about this, but يعني, if both configuration should be in the both side, يعني, can you in this diagram tell me where is the point in this diagram of this flow of the request in this routing, which has 2 policy. One of them, it is a GMS publisher or sending the message to the queue, right? There is no back end here. There is no work. There is no hello world here. It is only GMS using the connection.
No,
يعني
that's
traffic,
what I'm
the traffic
saying.
coming from a mobile, make thread, make transport, identification, request processing, then send the traffic to where? To the hello world flow, or inside the backend, or it's send it to the direct to the message or the queue.
It is going to the message queue from where?
Okay.
From where? So Hello World is on this other integration server.
It is the listener. The Hello World is a listener.
Yes,
is triggered
exactly.
by the received message, right?
Yes. Yes.
So both of them is listening to the same queue.
Exactly.
And yes. So now maybe I get this. I get it. I get it clear. Type.
Now,
What
that is
about?
why I showed you the REST variant of it, because it is easy to understand where the message is getting published. Basically, the same concept, but the implementation is slightly different here. So, in this REST variant, if you see that from this, so as you said, the request is coming from the mobile device. I am doing all this identification, etc., then request processing, etc. Then API gateway is sending the message to this particular topic name. And
Right.
my hello world is triggered. There is a trigger created called subject subscribe message. It is
Okay.
listening on the same topic, and then it is calling this trigger service, which is taking the message from that topic and
Okay.
processing it. And then after processing it, it is publishing the response back to another topic called acknowledgement T underscore T. So in the policy action stage, I have defined reply to topic name as acknowledgement T to tell API gateway that response is coming to this acknowledgement T. So it should listen to this topic to get the response.
So to get the response to do what?
And then it will go back to the consumer. So it will just take the response. And if you want to do some response processing to be done on the response or conditional error handling, so it will be done. Otherwise, the
so that
response will be.
you in the integration we had two type of flows, like publishing the message and forget, and the other one publish and wait.
Correct.
Waiting for response. This is how we apply publish and wait response, right?
Yes, this is
But if
always
I didn't,
synchronous.
yes, if I didn't set this acknowledgement, it will publish to the queue, and you need to set some kind of response to the user direct, right?
Yes. So
So it is
yeah.
not mandatory. It is not mandatory to configure this reply queue.
I got your point. I think it is not mandatory to set this topic. Let me just try. Yeah, it is not mandatory to set this topic, this reply queue. So what will happen in this case? So there is no reply coming back. So as you can see, I'm hitting this API. So this API is getting executed. So if I enable tracing, I can view. See, this API got executed successfully, but there is no response coming back from the endpoint because I have not configured any reply queue here.
Right.
So,
Right.
so now,
No,
sorry, go ahead,
you
please.
can continue. No, Shane, continue.
No,
Continue.
I mean, this kind of blank response can be confusing for the consumer because they are expecting some response to come back to. So in that case, what we can do is we can take help of this response processing policy and can
Yes.
set some default message. So for
Right.
maybe or we can do multiple things. So we can just send a default message, or maybe let's say I want to, does it return any response? Status code 204. So I can set a proper response code.
This variable, it is autocomplete, or this is from the history if you are using?
No, it is not autocomplete, but it shows some suggestion. Response, is it response dot status code? Yeah. So I can think it should go into the. Sorry, it should be in the header transformation, not in the. It's not changing the code, but yeah, my idea
Okay,
is that
I got
yeah,
the idea. I got the idea.
yeah.
I got the idea. Fine. This is the first part of PubSub, like we are publishing the messages. What about the subscribers? If I try to make some consumer subscribe to or like like webhook service
Yeah.
connected to this topic for this reply or this acknowledgement or the processing
Yes.
topic, or if we publish something in the topic and I need to make a webhook to a set, the consumer connecting using the webhook to receive any notification related to this through API. Is there any implementation here for this?
Yeah. So for that, we can use this policy action called in the transport. We can enable it to use JMS. So here in this case, we can like so this particular API. So same thing, we have to provide the JMS connection alias name here.
It will be defined as a provider or as as a
Subscriber.
as a subscriber.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, okay, so let me just rephrase it, the use case. So, I want this API to be able to take a message from a request topic or a queue and then process it. Processing can happen normally over either native can be on SOAP or REST enabled or can be JMS enabled. But when the request is coming, it can come via a topic or queue. So I can define the JMS connection alias name here, and then I can define the source details here. So let's say I have a message in topic ready, which is of type topic. I can, so normally how you configure the trigger to use some JMS selector, same thing we can configure here if required. And then we can define what is my resource name. Okay, fine. So, okay, fine. You give me some time. I'll configure it fully. Okay. So here in this case, if my endpoint is REST or SOAP enabled, got deleted. So I can say hello world, and it is going to use. Let's keep it in get method, and content type will be application JSON. So by doing this configuration, I'm telling this API to retrieve the message from this particular topic. And let's just remove this and bring back our straight through routing policy. now I
Yeah,
will.
now what you're trying to do by straightforward, the straight-through routing and the inbound authentication here. Now, after, يعني, when actually the triggered will be happen in the transportation, يعني, after we receive, يعني, how the consumer now get the benefit of this API, how he will detect the changes and he get feedback, like
So,
based on this diagram, what I understand that the triggering, it will be start from the transport layer, transport step. Then it will call the hello world endpoint. Then it will response to the consumer with the set of information from the from where بقى يعني because the transport it will pick the message. Now it will pass to the routing, maybe I don't know, in set of variable or whatever, and it will process and it will feedback the consumer, but the consumer should start the API call with a post or get, right? But this is,
consumer.
I'm not
No. Consumer need not. So, consumer can just send a GMS message. So, API will be still triggered using that GMS message. Is that your question? How the API will be triggered?
No, yes, how the API should be triggered. It should be there is like a streaming API. I should be subscribed to this API, so I'm keeping listening to this API. Once any events happen inside the integration or the queue, I should be get some kind of notification based on that. Are we able to do this by this policy related to GMS?
Streaming API that you are talking about, I'm not clearly getting it, but what I can tell is if your consumer wants to send something using
No,
a
the consumer خلاص start finish the first part, and I have a specific application publish the messages, and I have 3 different consumer interested to know about this message, and they need to subscribe. Maybe after months, maybe I have 10 subscriber, 10 consumer. Okay, I just need to provide them a unified API so can be subscribed to this API. I will not provide them a direct connection to the GSN queue and provide them a credential inside this queue, because the queue is still inside MWE, inside the green zone. It is not published.
okay.
So is there any way to provide a facility through the gateway so they can like able to webhook a set of API open source in the gateway, so they can get notified if there is something change inside a queue or an event processor or whatever the broker inside the MWE?
Okay. And just one last question. How are they going to send any request or no? They will just keep getting some information or event.
They should be subscribed to maybe, and as I told you, maybe this is kind of a streaming
Okay, got
API,
it.
so it will they shall just subscribe and stay listening, is waiting, like what actually the application do with the queue, but it is through API, so they can start listening. Once either in any interested event coming to their queue, they will get notified by the API or whatever this streaming events.
I cannot think of anything out of the box without writing a custom solution. I got your webhook requirement, but I don't think there is anything out of the box available to support that at this point. Um, no, nothing of that sort. I will double check internally, but I don't think we can provide them a streaming API that they will keep listening without the help of JMS. Without the help of JMS, so no, I cannot confirm you on that.
Okay. So can you يعني check internally with maybe with your team? Maybe we can. Is there any feature related to this? Because most of the modern application now it is working on asynchronous and the publishing mechanism. So maybe I hear about this feature inside WSO2, but I don't know if they are able to implement it or not. So
Hmm.
maybe it is exist in the, or maybe need to put some customization to be available.
Okay. Yeah, I will check, but yeah, I cannot think of anything out of the box at this point. Callback is possible, but webhook, we'll see. I'll try to find some information.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, okay. We still have 1 more hour left. So after finishing the routing logic, I was actually going to describe this transport logic. I mean, we already have seen that we can use this transport logic to enforce HTTP as well as HTTPS operation. I mean, keep the API enabled on both protocols. At the same time, we can keep an API enabled to use JMS. So basically, if there is a message coming to an inbound topic, API gateway is capable of subscribing to that message and process it and send it to the backend. Mostly this is like an asynchronous flow. However, if you want to send the response back, I mean, from this response processing, there is no way we can send the response back to the consumer. But if we still have such a requirement, then probably we can configure a custom solution in the response processing where we can call an external endpoint or publish the message to another topic. And from there, the consumer can subscribe it. So call like either call a web methods IS service to take the message and publish to a topic, or take help of an web URL to send the response back to the consumer, or we can directly configure the JMS topic details, etc., which can be uh, which the consumer can subscribe to and can process the or take the response. So this is one of the yeah. Okay, so this is one use case of using this transport policy. We can bridge the gap not only between HTTP and HTTPS, but we can also seamlessly use JMS. And the good thing is that JMS and HTTP can coexist. So the same API can now be invoked by either SOAP REST or by JMS. Additionally, if we are using we can set some media type here if required. So this transport policy in a way work as kind of a mediation policy which can bridge the protocol gap. Similar mediation policy and transformation policy we have at this request and response processing stage. So let me go out of this. Hello. So yesterday I briefly described what are the different request and response policies are available. So using and mostly the request and response policy actions are similar in nature. So if we are using one, the same can be configured on the response. I mean, if I'm explaining it once, the same can be applied for response processing as well. Now, under under request processing policy action, we have several options available. One such option is validating the API specification, where we can validate the incoming request against a defined XML schema. In this case, when we use schema, it has to be like an application XML type of message. Otherwise, the schema validation will not work. Also, if it is a REST based resource, we can use query parameters or path parameters, or we can check content parameters, etc., to validate the API specifications. If I go to, let me also open in parallel a SOAP API. Yeah, the same thing basically we can validate in both cases. So this will be validated. Now, one thing I did not understand, even I was looking at it this morning. So it only says like what to validate, but it nowhere specifies whether, except for HTTP header, nowhere it specifies what should be the value. So maybe it just enforces the structure validation, but not it does not enforce the data validation. So if I'm specifying query parameter, so it will only verify whether whether there are some query parameters present or not, but it will not go further down to see the query parameter is in the right string format, or maybe it checks, but it does not check the value. So I'm not sure exactly how this API specification works, but at a high level, it works against a schema validation, or it validates the incoming request to see whether it conforms to the API specification or the definition. Most commonly used request processing policy here is request transformation, and also invoke IS service to do some kind of transformation. Now, in request transformation, we have got several options available. For example, we can, let's say we have, okay, let me put it this way. So we can add or modify any of the incoming header parameters. If my native requires a particular header parameter to be sent and consumer cannot send it, I can inject it here using this header query path transformation parameter of request transformation policy. I can also remove certain type of header from being sent to native service. One good example is if I want to do a method transformation. Now, everywhere when we are routing, let me go back to this routing logic. So if we are using REST API, in the routing logic, in the configuration, we have an option of choosing what should be the HTTP method. So we can specify here what is the customers or native services preferred HTTP method. For example, they have exposed the REST resource using HTTP post method. So two scenarios are possible, that consumer is also using the HTTP post method when they are invoking the API. So in that case, we need not specify the HTTP method name if we already know that consumer is going to send the request following the same HTTP method requirement by the provider, in that case, we can just leave it to customer. Now, let's say there is a specific requirement that the request going to native must be on HTTP, must be using HTTP post, whereas the consumer is sending maybe HTTP get method. So here in this case, we can select to which method we need to convert the incoming method to. And as like often get methods, when request is sent using get methods, the inputs are sent in the query parameters or in the path parameters. So we can we can create a JSON payload out of those query parameters and can create a payload format which will be forwarded to the native at the routing stage. So doing this way we can support, this policy can support method transformation. Also, like if without the method transformation, if the payload has to be modified or a payload has to be dynamically generated based on some variable. So what can happen is, let's say I can run some other logic to define some variable and can create a payload dynamically using those variable values. So I can create either a JSON or an XML or a text payload dynamically here. So that is also supported. Then advanced transformation. So if we have advanced transformation, as in like we are calling an IS service to do lots of validation, transformation, etc. So either we can call that IS service from this request transformation policy itself, or can call it as an custom extension, invoke web methods IS custom extension action. So these are the possible things that we can do. Also, like we can convert some metadata information, like namespace prefix we can change from the in the incoming request before they are being sent to the native. Apart from that, we can advanced transformation uses this, and also for payload transformation. Yeah. So I said like we can generate payload dynamically or inject additional fields in the payload. If some complex transformation logic is to be performed, then we can take help of XSLT logic to convert the request into a standard, into a different format. So XSLT, use of XSLT is also possible at this stage. So apart from all this transformation logic or header manipulation logic, we can also employ data masking. So if we have some critical or sensitive information coming in the request, then we can mask those fields. So it has got two use cases. So one is that first of all, like if we have to take such, if we know which field is going to contain sensitive information, so based on the type of the message, whether it is an incoming XML or JSON, we can identify the field using XPath expression or JSON expression and can decide the masking criteria. So for example, in this Hello World API, I can set request.payload mobile number, which is going to have some sensitive data. So I can identify the field by its JSON path. If it is XML, I can just type the XML, the XPath of that particular field. And then I can decide what sort of masking logic I need to implement. Whether I will hide the value with this predefined stars and all, or I can filter out the value. Now, what is the difference between mask and filter? So when we are using mask, meaning the value will be not shown or stored in plain text. It will always be seen as stars. So if we have a requirement of storing the payload, request or response payload, where this sensitive information is available, we can simply mask the value so that in the server log or in the API gateway log or in the stored payload, the value cannot be seen in plain text. Now, what filter does is, so I can identify a field saying that this field is going to contain sensitive information and I want to filter it out. So what will happen is this field will entirely be removed from the request body. And it will not be even forwarded to the next stage, I mean, to my endpoint, to my service provider endpoint. So if this particular field has some business use, I mean, maybe by using this field, we are deciding or doing some computation or processing. In that case, the computation logic will not work because filtering will absolutely remove the field from the request going to the end system. So be careful whether you want to completely filter out. I mean, filtering out is still possible, but we have to make sure that this particular field is no longer used or it is never used in the downstream application for any kind of business logic processing. So based on that, we can decide whether or not to mask or filter. So when we mask it, it will just not be seen in plain text. And when we filter it, it will be completely removed from the payload. Now, whatever is the filter or mask criteria we are applying here, additionally, not for, additionally, we have got two other checkboxes that controls whether this masking or filtering logic will be applicable only for transaction logging or applicable to the payload. So filter, as I said, like it will be completely, if I'm selecting filter and also this property is checked, meaning it will be completely removed from the payload. If I'm selecting mask and also selecting apply for payload, then what will happen is when it goes to the request to the endpoint service, to the endpoint service, there instead of getting the actual value, it will always get this kind of masked value. And again, like the logic will fail if I have written any logic. So I can quickly test it. So it is failing now. And if I take a look at the native error message, it will say like this mobile number is missing. It has to come in the request. If I uncheck this option, then probably I can get some response back. It's still failing, but 404 not found. Should at least not return 404 not found. Anyhow, so that is the use of this masking condition or the use case of data masking feature. Nothing much to talk about this. It is purely based on the requirement that you are getting, and then you can decide whether or not
Okay.
to use request
This is-
processing policy.
I need to ask about if you are allowed to mask the same policy it already exists in the response processing.
Yes, it is existing in the response processing.
So the request processing it is because in any way now I see the in the traffic step they already attach a global policy related to log the input output. So if there is an sensitive data inside the output, I need to exclude it from the log. Yeah, like the OTP. If I try to send OTP to the user and or maybe I send something to, I don't know. I have
Yeah, any
no
sensitive
case, but if sensitive
information.
data, I don't need to log and it should be returned from the API to the consumer. I am able to mask this before logging this before getting inside the policy of the log, because I see the log policy is attached inside the traffic monitor.
Yes, yes. Although it is there in the traffic monitoring, but if we are implementing it in the data masking in the response stage, we have the same setup whether or not we can remove it from transaction logging. So after the request policy will be the response processing data masking policy will be executed, and it will be removed from the log. So it will work. I may not be able to show you do the demo, but it will definitely work. So what you are saying, although traffic monitoring like kind of sits in between, but we can still implement this response processing policy. Just we have to be careful about selecting this property called apply for transaction logging, and it will remove the particular field or mask the particular field from the log.
So what is the exact effect if I to apply this apply for transaction logging? It should be this log should be asynchronous with the processing, right? Yani
Yes, yes.
this task of log and monitoring, it should run asynchronous with the other processing activity, right? So
Yes.
it's already logged the data, then processing the data, maybe in the same time, because it is two different threads, and how it will reflect back, or it will make, if I check this one, it should be it will be synchronous with after the processing, or what will happen actually?
What
Yani,
will happen, meaning it you can just see the result that in the stored request or response stored response payload, this field is not present, or it is present but with as a masked field.
okay, maybe it need a more experiment to figure out this.
Yeah, so in transaction logging policy, we have the option of storing the request and response payload, right? So either way, you can store response payload, store request headers, etc. 404 not found. Anyway, well, okay, I'll try to implement. Do I have a policy template here? No, nothing for data masking available. So I'll do a quick demo for you tomorrow to show you how the field is masked or entirely removed. I'll use the same thing. For some reason, it is currently not working for me. The endpoint itself is getting failed. Yeah. But theoretically speaking, if I am enabling data masking on the response processing, I can decide whether or not to send this sensitive field back in the response to the customer, or whether or not it should be present in the log information. So these two parameters will control that. So I can define which field to be masked or filter out, and using these two parameters I can decide whether they will be from where it will be dropped or where it will be masked, kept hidden. So we'll complete this demo tomorrow. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So nothing much to talk about this, and for response policy, additionally, we can apply course related parameters. So if you have to implement course parameters, so basically integration server also provides a set of course settings. So make sure that, I mean, when integration server level course setting is there, I think that is applicable globally to all transactions that are requiring course related validation. If you want to particularly apply for one API or so, and not globally for everything, then you disable the integration server course settings and keep them enabled only at the API layer. So based on the requirement, if you have to send such information, then we can use this course policy action in response processing. For the other actions like validate API specifications, so same way we can validate whether or not the response is conforming to a particular structure. We can do a schema validation only when it is using XML message. We can do a content type check. We can do a HTTP header check. So we can see whether the necessary HTTP keys headers are present or not. And also, if no options are there, if you need to do advanced processing, so like request processing, you can always do XSLT on the response processing. On the outgoing response, we can add XSLT logic. And if nothing is there, if you need to do further processing like encryption, decryption, etc., especially for JSON messages, you can call or invoke an web methods IS service to run the encryption, decryption logic. So that's all for the request and response processing. I will complete. Well, tomorrow we'll start with this data masking, and then we'll move on to the other topics. So the last policy in this for today is the error handling policy. So in error handling policy, we can also do some conditional processing. And conditional processing includes lots of options. So these are the three possible policy actions. So custom extension, again, nothing but calling an IS. One good use of custom extension is that often our API and integration platforms are connected with some third-party log monitoring tool or service audit logging tool. So we can, for example, ELK or Elasticsearch Logstash Kibana. So we can capture API related failures or errors. So when we have like backend flow services, we can always turn on auditing on those flow services and can capture the information. And we can always create some framework to publish the service log information via a message tool and subscribe it and put it in Elastic Search and visualize it from Kibana. So at the same time, if we want to capture the error events in the API gateway, like during the API processing, if an API is failing identification and authorization policy, then we can capture that information. Same way we can publish it to ELK via a messaging platform. So custom extension is useful in meeting those requirements because it can capture the data and then can further send it to a custom messaging platform, and from there we can push the data to Elastic. So the advantage will be like I can correlate the API call with the service call and see whether the failure happened at the API layer or at the service layer. Now, so custom extension, yeah, calling web methods flow service, we can call from the custom extension. Now, conditional error processing comes with different parameters, different options, and as the name suggests, it always works on certain condition. So this Hello World API, switch to the REST version of it. So in the okay, I think I majorly messed up all these configurations. Okay. So what I was trying to show is that in my Hello World service, this flow service, yeah. So in this service, I am setting different status code. Basically, I'm controlling the HTTP status code that should go to the endpoint. So I have created two different error condition. One is when this mobile number is not present, it will throw an exception saying that mobile number is missing, and that should result into HTTP 500 status code and should be considered as like a major failure in the backend service. Similarly, I have created a logic which checks whether the mobile number has all 10 digits. If not, it is also throwing an error, but I'm treating this error as kind of a data error, and I'm changing the status code to 501. So I'm also sending back some processing status code. So if 0 means all good, 1 means some data error has occurred, and according to that, I'm setting the response code to 501. So now in the conditional error processing, what I can do is I can check. So as I said, this is based on the condition. So I can check, let's say, me go to the SOAP version of it. I can create a condition saying that my response dot status code is equals 501. So this condition will be triggered whenever my backend is returning a response code of 501. And then if this condition is evaluated, then I can do a header transformation or maybe a status. Status code should be, okay, I think this way. So this will become the new status code. At the same time, I will customize a message saying, something like that. And I will use this as a default message to go to the service and to the consumer. So if I can create certain condition like this. Let's see if it works. No. So if this condition is correctly evaluated, then I will see that instead of getting the actual error code or API defined a standard error message, customer is seeing a different status and a message and a HTTP status altogether. Now, so this is the basis of doing conditional error processing. Now, when I'm doing conditional error processing, I can define different stages inside it. So there can be a requirement of doing the error processing as a run a pre-processing service to do this error handling, or there can be like a post-processing service, and that can be run. So pre-processing and post-processing, where it will be needed. So for example, the one I just gave, that I may be interested in capturing all these failures and pushing it to a third-party auditing framework. So my intention can be that before API gateway, so conditional processing is required because we want to standardize different error or make some meaningful, give some meaningful categorization based on certain codes and etc. Divide them between business and data error or technical error. Now, I may be interested in capturing the raw response before API Gateway applies all this error transformation rules. So at that point of time, I can run a pre-processing service, which will take the like whatever raw response is coming back from the endpoint. This pre-processing service will take that input and will publish the input to that third party auditing, service auditing, or any service auditing framework or log monitoring framework as is. Then I can apply this conditional formatting to change the error message or the status code and etc. Also, like if I am interested in capturing the pre-process, like what the error message becomes after these conditions are applied, then I can similarly run a post-processing rule which will take this reformatted error message and can push this into that log monitoring or service auditing framework. So based on the requirement, I can define whether to, first of all, whether I need this kind of pre and post processing services running. If yes, then if both are required, if not, then whether it should run at pre-processing stage or at a post-processing stage. So different combinations are possible. Unfortunately, I think I have to take a look at this API to see what has gone wrong in them. So looks like there are several failures happening. So I'll take some time to fix all these errors. And tomorrow, I'm definitely gonna demonstrate this conditional error handling to what I just explained. I'll show you how we can change the header status or the reformat failure message accordingly. Now, when we are using conditional error processing, so before that, we need to understand about how API Gateway handles the native faults. So under this administration option, there is an option called API fault. So whatever response you see in Postman or SOAP API, so this so there are two options. One is send native provider fault, or the other is the default error message. So if we are sending if we are choosing this default error message, means whatever error is returned by the native service provider, API Gateway formats that error and structures it in this way, like error message, etc., and returns this back to the consumer. So in most cases, we keep this default error message option enabled so that every consumer gets a standard response back from the API Gateway in case of an error. Now, if we select this send native provider fault response, what will happen is API Gateway, instead of conditioning the message, it will send the complete stack trace back to the consumer. So since the complete stack trace may not make any sense to the consumer, so it is better we do not select this and keep this option enabled. So when no conditional error processing is implemented at the policy action stage, API Gateway will always fall back to this format for sending the error information back. If we have the conditional error handling policy enabled here, in that case, we have an option to override that by. So we can define our own failure message, etc. And at the same time, we have an option of selecting, let's say I want to send back a JSON message, and we can select whether or not to use it as a default. So if we do not select this checkbox, what will happen is API Gateway will still send the default API fault message back to the consumer. So when we select this checkbox, the message that we are defining here, formatting here, will be sent back to the consumer. Similarly, here also we can select whether or not send native provider, the stack trace coming from the native provider can be sent back to the consumer or not. So if we are selecting this option, it will override even this custom formatting, and it will again send back the entire stack trace. So whenever you are dealing with conditional error processing, please keep in mind about these two parameters and adjust them based on the need by your consumer. So unfortunately, I cannot implement it today, but tomorrow we'll begin with the implementation of this conditional error processing. Basically, I'll just give a quick demo of this conditional error processing and data masking. Data masking is also available at the error processing stage because we might need to store the request response payload even when there is an error. So if there are sensitive information present in the request and response, we can use this masking logic to hide them from being logged in plain text format. So tomorrow we will I'll present these two demos and then we will start a new topic on threat protection policies. Okay. So any questions so far what we covered today, please feel free to ask. If no questions, we can really, I don't want to start this new topic of threat protection today. We'll start it fresh tomorrow. So if you have any questions, please we can discuss them now or we can close today's session, let's say 5 minutes early. So let me know.
Thank you for your hello. Hello.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Thank you for your valuable information. So, from my side, I don't have any questions. Only maybe waiting just if for your feedback about this webhooks implementation inside the gateway. That's it. Maybe you can. Is there anything related to this? And
Yeah,
for
I will
the
find
rest,
that out.
it's okay for me. And maybe I don't know. Maybe other colleagues have any questions. We can, if they don't have any questions, we can close the session now. No problem.
Okay. So anyone else has any question or?
Thank you.
we-
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Dil.
Sure. So we'll catch up again tomorrow and we'll continue with the remaining topics. So thank you everyone for attending today's session and thank you for your patience.